What's going on, everybody? It's RoarYGO, and welcome back to another episode of Sleeper Sunday. So Sleeper Sunday, for those of you that don't know, is a series I came up with showcasing fun hidden decks you may not know about that can deal quite a bit of damage in the proper hands. We'll be going over a basic deck list, strengths, weaknesses, what can be done to make the deck better, and of course a few replays to see the deck in action. And for today's episode, we're going to be going over the winner of this month's poll, that being Ghoti. So Ghoti is a TCG exclusive archetype of water fish monsters based on the aesthetic of deep sea fish, combined with the vast open void of space in the infinite cosmos, both of which being things that are compared to each other quite frequently. Think of the whole "we know more about the surface of the moon than we do our own oceans" kind of quote. Their primary gimmick revolves around banishing cards, be it their own or the opponent's, in order to progress their plays, which typically happen on the opponent's turn. They were released in Power of the Elements back in August 2022, with their most recent wave of support being from Darkwing Blast in December of 2022, making them officially the most recent archetype we've ever covered on a Sleeper Sunday video. They have a synchro-focused extra deck that sort of revolves around the synchro climbing mechanic, not as much as a deck like Mayakashi, another Sleeper Sunday candidate we've covered before, but still with a pretty heavy emphasis on climbing from level 6 to 8 to 10 synchro monsters. And what better way to start off the list than with 3 copies of Pacey's Light of the Ghoti. So Pacey's is a level 2 tuner monster with 0 attack and defense that says you can banish this card you control to special summon a fish monster from your hand except Pacey's Light of the Ghoti. It also has an effect that's shared by another one of the level 2 tuners, saying during the standby phase of the next turn after this card was banished, you can special summon this banished card, and during your opponent's main phase, if this card was special summoned this turn, you can quick effect immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon a fish synchro monster using this card you control, and you can only use each effect of Pacey's once per turn. So Pacey's is a very important card for the archetype, namely because not only is it one of the main level 2 tuners that you actually want to go into in order to access your plays on the opponent's turn due to its effect as a quick effect synchro summon, but also because it gets really strong fish monsters out of your hand, such as a really big boss monster we'll mention later, that can end up making an absolutely massive end board off of just itself and Pacey's. After a little bit of rearranging there, we also have 1 copy of Shift, Fairy of the Ghoti, which is also a level 2 tuner monster with 0 attack and 500 defense, that has the same second and third effects as Pacey's, but with the first effect saying you can banish it from grave, then target a fish you control and make it gain 500 attack until the end of this turn. So Shift is also a really important card because it is another one of your level 2 tuners that can quick synchro, but it's a very important card even at 1 because it allows you to take either Beautiful Princess or Lifeless Leaf Fish and turn them into a 1-card combo to at least access your synchro plays in the opponent's turn because of how easy it is to use Shift's effect. You can literally just have any fish on board, this engrave, banish it from graveyard for absolutely free without having to have any other setup, and then you get to access your plays in the opponent's turn when it summons itself back. Also, something that I forgot to mention during the actual features of the archetype, like some of the gimmicks and stuff about it, Shift is actually it's not anagram, is it? I think it's anagram. It is an anagram, so it is an anagram of the word fish, saying shift, and Ghoti, by the way, means fish. I'm pretty sure everyone knows that, that's why I didn't mention it. Now, I don't know all of the anagrams myself. I am not, completely caught up on, the lore or whatever, but I do know that shift is an anagram for fish, and then I know that Ascon down here is an anagram for sakana. It's the Japanese word for fish, and I think that might be all of the ones that I know. I'm not really too caught up on it, but I think it is something that's pretty funny. For their final tuner, we have 1 copy of Zep, Ruby of the Ghoti, the card that always makes me think of Jigsaw because of Zep from the first movie. But this is also a level 2 tuner that has 0 attack and 1000 defense. It says you can banish it from your hand and then target a fish in your grave and banish it as well. And during your opponent's turn, if this card is banished, you can special summon it, and then on special summon, you can, except during the damage step, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon a fish synchro using this card you control. So Zep is interesting because it does still follow the whole aspect of summoning itself on the opponent's turn, because, actually the other ones can summon on your turn, but Zep is only on the opponent's turn, and then also being able to synchro summon, but of course there is the big difference in that it's on banish instead of during the standby phase, so that's going to be really important for some cards we'll mention in a little bit. And then also, it's immediately on summon that you synchro summon, so it has its advantages and disadvantages because immediately on synchro summon means that your opponent has less time to react to it or hit it with any sort of disruption, but it doesn't really give you too much wiggle room for timing your own things properly, because if you want to utilize the Zep in its full potential, you're going to have to use your disruption or the thing that you're going to go into with the Zep to go into your disruption as fast as you can, and so that can prevent you from getting multiple disruptions over the span. You just gotta outright do them all at once. but Zep is still such an insanely strong card for the archetype, because for a really, really important card for the deck that I'll mention in a little bit, or not a little bit, probably just a lot later, it just ends up making the entire deck synergize so much better with itself. A card that is really important in combination with Zep is going to be Snopio's Shade of the Ghoti. So this is their first non-tuner monster. This is a level 6. It has 2100 attack and 0 defense, so it's a pretty big body even in the main deck. And it says during the main phase quick effect, you can banish 2 fish monsters from your hand and or graveyard, special summon this card from your hand, and if this card is special summoned, you can target a face-up card in the field and banish it when it leaves the field, and if this card is banished, you can banish 1 fish monster from your graveyard, add this card to your hand. Wow, take a shot for every time I just read the word banish in that entire effect. Jokes aside though, Snopios is a really, really important card for the archetype because there's so many different applications that he has for the deck. So not only is he a free level 6 body, which is really important with your level 2 tuners to go into level 8 or 10 synchro monsters, but it's also a quick effect to summon itself, so that's really good in combination with your quick effects to synchro. But most importantly, you can banish monsters in order to summon it, or it's not that you can, but you kind of have to. But this is amazing in combination with Zep, because you can go Snopios effect, banishing Zep, to special summon, and then you can use Zep and the effect of Snopios on summon to make something banish when it leaves the field, and you get a free synchro summon while also either getting some better removal, or allowing Snopios to even easier access his third effect, which is a really good way of infinitely recurring him, especially because you usually have something like a Schiff or a Pacey's in grave, so you can banish it from grave to add the Snopios back for basically free. It's a very strong card and highly searchable. The resources it can banish can end up being a little bit like unfortunate, but it is highly outweighed by the benefits of the card, especially considering due to it just being a quick effect at any point during the main phase, you can use it on your opponent's turn 0 when they're going first, and get some pretty funny plays involving Zep if you want to. For the final main deck Ghoti monster, we have 2 copies of Ixip, Omen of the Ghoti. It says if a fish monster is banished, you can special summon this card from your hand, and during the standby phase of the next turn after this card was banished, you can target one of your Ghoti traps that is banished or in your graveyard, and set that target. So much like how we completely ignored Zep's first effect existing, just ignore Ixip's second effect. We don't play any of the Ghoti traps, they're not very good, as I'll explain later, but the first effect is really, really good, because not only is it a free level 4 fish monster, but all of your stuff is banishing anyway, so it can easily be a free body on board, but also a sort of chain block in a way. Like, it has to be a very specific chain block, but it does work as a chain block, especially with something like Zep, so it is a really strong card overall, and its stat lines will be really good in the Small World package we'll mention later. We're also on 3 copies of Beautiful Princess. Simply on summon, banishing it to summon any level 4 or lower fish from your deck. It accesses you almost your entire deck. You can get your Pacey's, you can get your Schiff, sorry, not fish. You can access your Lifeless Leaf Fish, which is the most important one, but you can even access something like Gluttonous Reptolphin Gretheus, which we'll also talk about. All of these are really strong cards to get directly from your deck off Princess, and just serves as a free extra 3 copies of whatever you want from deck. So let's get into the thing that I mentioned earlier works insanely well with Pacey's. This is Super Ancient Deep Sea King Coelacanth, one of the most broken cards in the entire game. This is a level 7 fish monster with 2800 attack and 2200 defense that says once per turn you can discard 1 card, special summon as many level 4 or lower fish monsters as possible from your deck, but they cannot declare an attack and their effects are negated. When this face-up card on the field is targeted by a card effect, quick effect, you can tribute 1 other fish monster, negate that effect, and if you do, destroy that card. So ignoring the second effect entirely, this card is absurd. For the cost of just a discard, you're summoning 4 fish monsters maximum directly from your deck, aka, you know, your tuners, your things that have graveyard effects so the effect negation doesn't matter, things that you want to put in grave so you can banish them for later, and there's no restrictions or anything on it saying they can't be used as X or Y material, so you can go into synchro plays, Xyz plays, link plays, you can do whatever you want with these fish that you summon. And the cherry on top is that if you'll notice, this card is old as shit. I mean, it is super ancient, but it's a soft once per turn. And you have ways of utilizing this card more than once in a turn. So just off of Coelacanth, just any way to get Coelacanth on board, you can make some of the most cracked rogue deck end boards ever with various negates and other sorts of disruptions, which we'll show in a few of the replays. It's not a card that every Ghoti player plays, it kind of depends on your build, but I am playing a very combo focused build, and Coelacanth just makes the deck so strong, and it has a very oppressive end board if you can pull it off. We are also on 3 copies of Silent Angler, so it is an inherent summon that specials itself just for free especially if you control a water monster. I kind of don't like that it prevents you from summoning from the hand, period, for the rest of the turn, because you can end up drawing into things that you would have been able to summon, you know, Snopios, or using Pacey's effect, Ixie, Minairuka, etc. But it's a free level 4 water body, so I'm not going to really complain. We also have 2 copies of Lifeless Leaf Fish, so this is probably one of the most important cards in the deck, because a level 4 fish that says when this card is summoned, you can send a fish from your deck to the graveyard, except Lifeless Leaf Fish, and you can banish it from your grave to target 3 fish in your grave, shuffle them back, and then draw a card. So the second effect is just really good in general, especially after you summon it off a Coelacanth. You can just use the effect in grave despite not being able to use the on-field effect. But the first effect is really, really important, because while it can just set up things like for your Snopios plays, like you can dump a Zep or something like that for your Snopios to banish, most importantly, it dumps Shift. Because dumping Shift off of Leaf Fish makes Leaf Fish a 1-card combo, same with Beautiful Princess, that while it isn't the most crazy thing, it can at least end on some disruption as well as some follow-up, which can be really helpful depending on the rest of the cards in your hand, and it at least just allows you to access your engine stuff so that maybe you can prevent your opponent from killing you and you can have some follow-up on the next turn. This is because you can literally just go Lifeless Leaf Fish, effect sending Shift, Shift effect targeting the Leaf Fish by banishing from grave, Shift effect during the next standby, special itself back to the field, and now you can access your level 6 synchros, and then you'll be able to access your level 8 synchro as well, which we'll get into again later. We also have 2 copies of Minairuka, so a lot of people might not know what this card does because it is a TCG exclusive out of Photon Hypernova, so allow me to read it off. So it is a level 4 fish monster with 1500 attack and 500 defense that says when a water monster's effect is activated, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can banish a face-up fish, sea serpent, or aqua monster you control, then target 1 face-up card on the field and negate its effects until the end of your opponent's turn. You can only use each effect of Minairuka once per turn. So this is actually a pretty strong card because not only are you accessing a free level 4 body on board, especially a free level 4 fish body, but you're also getting a card that can banish your things. Keep in mind, your things like being banished that gives you setup for the next turn, and you can use it to break apart your opponent's board by negating any face-up card, not just monster, any card, so it can even work on pesky, like, field spells or continuous back row. It's not like it chain blocks or anything like that. In fact, it can itself be chain blocked because your opponent has the opportunity to respond before you can, but it is still a pretty nice card for just getting free extension on board, and it's a good target to search off of a card we'll mention later. There's also 2 copies of Gluttonous Reptolfin Greethius, so this is a card that I'm really excited that I get to play because I remember pulling it out of Phantom Rage. I have so many of them, and I was like, this card will be really good one day, I'm sure of it. And it finally has a home. So this is a level 3 fish tuner, so another tuner monster with 1000 attack and defense that says you can target a fish, sea serpent, or aqua in your grave with an equal or lower level than the number of cards in your opponent's hand. Special summon it, but it cannot activate its effects this turn. You can only use this effect of Greethius once per turn, and not once per turn. If this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can make that synchro monster that used this card as material gain 200 attack and defense for each card currently in your opponent's hand, and this is a permanent gain. This card has a few really useful applications. Just being able to summon any of your level 4s from your graveyard and then extend by going into like a Monoceros or something, that's already really strong, but it's also really funny because you can usually use this to go into a Baron de Fleur, and then if your opponent still has all 5 cards in their hand, you can just make a 4k attack Baron, which is really funny. Not to mention in combination with Cheng Ying, you can make your Cheng Ying even bigger. And again, this isn't a once per turn effect when it comes to the attack gain, so you can literally just do it more than once by going like special 2 from deck during the 2 times you use Coelacanth. Very hilarious. And then for the final fish tuner monster, and final fish monster in the deck actually, we have 1 copy of Fishborg Launcher. It's a level 1 fish tuner monster with 200 attack, 100 defense, cannot be used as synchro material except for the summon of a water synchro. If you have a monster in your grave other than Launcher and all of them are water, you can special this card from your graveyard but banish it when it leaves the field, and this is a hard once per turn. So anyone that has seen my Mermail deck profile will know that I absolutely adore Fishborg Launcher. It does suck to draw, and it means that your hand trap game isn't going to be as good because, you know, it's going to turn it off of you something like Ash, but it's still such a strong card, especially because you can summon it from deck with Coelacanth, and it gives you really good access to your level 8 or 9 synchros, so you kind of have to play it. And then for some miscellaneous monsters in the deck, we have 2 copies of Gameciel and 1 Wing Tortoise. So Gameciel, of course, is here because it's a really good kaiju, especially if you're going second, and it's still a water monster, so it does synergize with the rest of your stuff, but most importantly, it's a really, really good small world bridge. By using Gameciel as the middle bridge, you can go from any monster in your deck to any other monster in your deck, except for like Nibiru, of course, and that's actually really, really strong because your deck already kind of struggles with consistency a little bit at points, so using Small World to access something like a Coelacanth or a Pacey's when you have one or the other can end up being very, very strong. The same goes for the Wing Tortoise, which you're probably looking at this like, Aurora, what the absolute fuck is this card doing in your Ghoti deck?
Look at this dude.
Well, it's because I was looking for a target that would be really good in case I hard open the Gamma Seal. Because if I open Small World Gamma Seal as like my main bridge, I can't really do anything except for go into another copy of Gamma Seal off the first one. But now with the Wing Tortoise, I can go Small World reveal Gamma Seal into Wing Tortoise because it's an Aqua that doesn't match any other stats, and then you can go Wing Tortoise into any of your monsters with 1500 attack, and this includes, I believe, Ixeep, Lifeless Leaf Fish, and Minairuka. Oh, as well as Silent Angler because the 1400 defense as well. Not to mention, Wing Tortoise's effect can technically come up, especially when you use your Deep Beyond to wipe the board. It says when a face-up fish, sea serpent, or aqua you control is banished, and the original type has to be that, you can special this card from your hand or graveyard, so it's a free level 3 body, so I mean, I'm not going to really complain about it, even if it isn't going to be the most relevant effect. And the only hand trap we play in the deck is 3 copies of Nibiru. It's a deck that kind of struggles going second, so I mean, having the free blowout Nibiru is a really strong choice. Not to mention, it doesn't really interfere with your Fishborg launcher as well. Onto the back row, very few back row in the deck. We have 3 copies of the Most Distant Deepest Depths. Try saying that 5 times fast. This is their field spell that says while you control a fish synchro monster, this card cannot be destroyed or banished by card effects. You can only use each of the following effects of the Most Distant Deepest Depths once per turn. You can banish a fish from your hand or graveyard to add a Ghoti monster from your deck to your hand, and if a fish monster is normal or special summon to your field while this card's in your graveyard, you can target one fish monster you control, banish it, and if you do, add this card to your hand. So the first effect is something that you can kind of ignore at some points, but it's really important for their boss monster that we'll talk about later if you don't know it somehow. But the second effect is, of course, the real best part of the card. I mean, once per turn, just getting a free search for any of your Ghoti monsters while also continuing your plays by banishing stuff from your hand or graveyard. Really, really solid there, especially because you can access something like a Pacey's. Admittedly, I kind of wish the third effect had a more on-field utility effect instead of a recovery effect, because it's not like the best field spell in the world, so you don't really want access to it like all the time, like something like Trickstar Light Stage, for example. So I kind of wish maybe if like a fish was banished, you got to pop a card or something like that, but I mean, beggars can't be choosers. As I mentioned earlier, we have the 3 copies of Small World in order to further increase our consistency, and another card to further increase our consistency is 2 copies of Transmodify. So this is a card that I was kinda iffy on, not gonna lie. I saw it in the list that I ended up using as like my baseline template for this deck, and I was like, Transmodify? I mean, why would you do that? And admittedly, when it was at 3, it was bricking me a lot, but at 2, it's not as bad. And if you want to know the main lines, it's using Beautiful Princess if for some reason, I don't know, maybe it can't use this effect or something, to go into your any of your level 2s, sorry, same with Fishborg Launcher. You can use any of your level 2s to access your Gluttonous Reptolfin and Garethis. God, these names are so weird. And you can use, most importantly, any of your level 6s in the main or the extra deck to access your Coelacanth directly from your deck. So this isn't going to come up all the time, however, it is still a really good situation in case you can access a free Coelacanth directly from your deck. Not to mention, it can just end up being a really good extender, especially when you get hit by something like Nib, for example. And finally, we have 1 copy of Instant Fusion and 1 copy of Ready Fusion. This is for the rare fish in the Ulvane we play in the extra deck. The list that I looked at was playing 2 copies of Ready Fusion, but I was sitting there like, why would I do that when I'm only playing 2 copies anyway, so I can just go 1 instant, 1 Ready Fusion? Because I can use both of these in 1 turn if I open both, whereas I can't use both Ready Fusions. Like, I don't know, it just felt really weird to me. That is it for the main deck. Onto the extra deck, starting off with Arianpos, Serpent of the Ghoti. This is their level 6 fish synchro monster with 2100 attack. It requires 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. It says if this card is synchro summoned, you can banish 1 level 6 or lower fish monster from your deck. And if this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can target a fish monster in your graveyard, banish that target, then you can add a fish with an equal or lower level from your deck to your hand. Alright, so this card is the backbone of the entire archetype. Without Arianpos, this deck would be terrible. The on-synchro summon effect allows you to access so many different plays, from being able to banish a Snopios to add it back with its own effect, and most importantly, being able to banish a Zep from the main deck in case you can only access the Arianpos off the, for example, Lifeless Leaf Fish Dump Shift combo. You can use this to banish the Zep to get a free level 8 synchro. And then the graveyard effect is also really, really good, because more often than not, you're probably just banish itself, if not banishing one of your things that can float, and you can just basically get almost any of your fish directly from your deck for a good follow-up play, or you can even grab something like a Zep in case you already have Snopios live in your hand. There are so many different applications you can do with Arianpos because of just how generic it is. I mean, even if we got a new fish archetype that revolved even remotely around banishing, I think Arianpos would probably see play in it just because of how versatile it is. And I also just want to mention how awesome this artwork is. It's probably one of my favorite artworks in the game. In order of level, next up we have White Aura Monoceros, 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 whatever you want to call it. I just call it Monoceros because it sounds like rhinoceros, which it has one horn, so I mean, like, might as well. But this is a level 7 fish tuner monster that has 2500 attack and 1500 defense. It requires 1 water tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. It says when this card is synchro summoned, you can target a fish in your grave, special summon it, but it cannot attack this turn. You can only use this effect of White Aura Monoceros once per turn. And if this card you control is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to your graveyard, you can banish another water from your graveyard to special this card, and if you do, it is treated as a tuner. So while Monoceros isn't necessarily like a boss monster or anything like that, or a disruption, it is a really important combo piece because it can special summon back Coelacanth. This allows you not only to keep a free level 7 synchro on board to use as material for later, but it also lets you reuse the effect of Coelacanth, usually allowing you to get like 3 more bodies from deck at that point in the combo, which is massive. Also, the second effect that all the white auras share, that you can banish a water to special it from grave and treat it as a tuner, it's not a once per turn, and it's an effect that people like to underestimate, and it's even better in this deck than any other water deck because you actually want your things to be banished. So I mean, free bodies and your opponent can't really do too much about it. Next up is their level 8 synchro Ascon, the Bicorn Ghoti. Again, this is a level 8 synchro with 2700 attack and 0 defense. It requires 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. If this card is synchro summoned, you can target a fish you control and a card your opponent controls and banish them. And if this card is banished, you can banish a fish from your graveyard to special summon this card, and each of these effects are a hard once per turn. So Ascon is a really strong card overall because it's usually one of your better disruptions that you go into before you climb into your really big boss monster if you have to, but it also can recur itself while still banishing your own things in order to advance your place further or give you resources for the next turn. But one of the most interesting parts about Ascon's effect is that it's similar to Sword Soul Blackout, where the targets don't have to stay on board. So you can lose the Ascon after targeting it with its own effect, but your opponent's card will still get banished, which is really cool, especially because you can use, like, for example, Chainlink 1 Ascon in order to banish itself and then something else, and then Chainlink 2 a Ghoti tuner monster in order to quick synchro, and you can go into, like, your big boss monster while at the same time banishing off the Ascon effect. We also have 1 copy of White Aura Whale as the other White Aura monster that we play. Very simple enough card here. Level 8 Water Synchro, 2800 attack, 2000 defense, requires a Water Tuner, 1 or more non-tuner water monsters. On Synchro Summon, destroy all of your opponent's attack position monsters. It can attack twice, it does piercing, and it has the same floating effect. Like, what's not to love about this card? Funnily enough, excluding Baron, this is the most expensive card in the entire deck, and I think it's because it sits at around, like, $8. But yeah, this card is not only really good at going second, but it serves as an amazing disruption, because if you don't want to go into Ascon, for example, you can literally just wipe your opponent's entire attack position board, which is really good against a Link deck, for example, because this is a fish that you can quick make off of your effects. We have 1 copy of Adamancipator Risen Dragite, which technically the first effect to bounce things can work because you're maining the nib, but namely, if you have a water engrave, being a spell and trap negate is pretty huge, especially because it's a level 8 synchro that you can access really easily, plus 3000 attack and 2200 defense is nothing to scoff at. And then we also have 1 copy of Ravenous Croco Dragon Archithes. It requires 1 tuner, 1 or more non-tuners, to level 9, sorry. It is a fish synchro that has 1000 attack and defense, that gains 500 attack and defense for each card in your hand. You can only use each of its following effects once per turn. On Synchro Summon, you can draw cards equal to the number of non-tuners used for its Synchro Summon, and quick effect, you can discard 2 cards, target 1 card on the field, and destroy it. So Archithes is probably one of my favorite Synchro monsters of all time. It can end up being a really big body, it's really easy to make because it's a level 9, and you can use a level 7 and a 2, an 8 and a 1, a 6 and a 3 in the case of Snopios or Iron Post and Grethys. But really, just being able to draw up to 2 cards is absolutely free in this deck, especially because you can draw into something like Nibiru or an Extender. And then the quick effect to discard 2 and pop 1 means it's a really good card to end on because it's still a free disruption, albeit you do have to lose a few resources and make him get smaller because of it. Alright, so on to the big Mama Jamma himself, herself, itself, whatever. This is Ghoti of the Deep Beyond. This is a level 10 water fish synchro monster with question mark attack and 0 defense. It requires 1 or more fish tuners and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. It says the original attack of this card becomes 500 times the number of banished monsters, and if this card is synchro summoned during your opponent's turn, you can banish all cards on the field, and during the standby phase of the next turn after this card was banished from the monster zone, you can special summon this banished card. So with the fact that this works on the opponent's turn makes it quite possibly one of the most broken disruptions of all time in just an alright archetype. There is a lot to unpack here, so first, it can be made using multiple tuners. This is really good for situations where you have multiple of your tuners coming back, but only 1 body, like for example Snopios, that you can access on the opponent's turn because either you bricked, you got disrupted, something like that. The stats becoming 500 times the number of banished monsters is going to make it a really big body, not just from your own things being banished, but also considering the fucking nuke effect that's going to wipe the entire board, and it's just going to come back. I literally on stream, I'll probably end up showing the replay, on stream last night as of recording this video, I had an 8500 attack Deep Beyond come back after wiping the entire board, and it only would have gotten bigger that turn due to things like Shift's graveyard effect, because it ends up going by 1000 instead of 500 because the additional 500. This card is just utterly absurd, but it's definitely like the final resort, or like the thing that you fall back on like the least if you can, because it does banish all of your things. So while you can end up having follow-up by summoning back your other banished monsters, you're usually going to use this, like I said, as like a last resort in case you really need to wipe your opponent's board, because it will summon itself back, and if your opponent's board's still wide open, you can probably go for game there. But otherwise, it can end up kind of putting you in a bad spot as well, though your opponent's going to be in a significantly worse one. As there are no restrictions on the actual synchro summoning and everything in this deck, we also have one copy of Baron de Fleur. Really powerful disruption here, free Omni, free Pop, summons back things like, you know, potentially Coelacanth directly from your grave, really good stuff here. We also have one copy of Cheng-Ying. Cheng-Ying is really strong in this deck. When Ghoti first came out and people were testing with it on EDO after the reveal, I saw someone summon Cheng-Ying in it, and I'm like, wow, this card is absurd in this deck, because it's going to be really, really big. It has protection that banishes your things, which sets up your plays later, and you're banishing stuff all the time, so you're going to have a bunch of free removal. And keep in mind, this is also going to make your Deep Beyond bigger the more you use this effect, and combine this with like a Greethies or something like that, and you're going to have a really terrifying beat stick. For the last synchro, we have one copy of Ice Shade Geimer Adrian. So for those of you that don't know, this is a level 10 Water Aqua synchro monster with 3000 attack and 1500 defense. It requires one Water Tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters. That quick effect can activate this effect. Face-up monsters you control cannot be destroyed or banished by your opponent's card effects this turn, but then if you activated this effect in response to your opponent's card or effect activation, and your opponent has a card with that name on their field in the graveyard, you can banish all of those cards. And if your card is banished by your opponent's card effect while this card's in your graveyard, except during the damage step of course, you can special summon this card, and each of these effects are hard ones per turn. So Adrian was going to be a really good card for a lot of decks that could access level 10 synchros in the tier limit format, because when your opponent activates a tier effect, you can chain this effect to not only protect your things, but also to just banish the tier monster from grave. But even now, it's still a really strong card, because keep in mind, it's going to banish things, which is going to help with your Ghoti effects. It's going to give protection, which is really nice as well, especially because only opponent's card effects, your own stuff can still use it, like Snopios for example. And it's a really big body on top of a fine disruption that can continuously recur itself from the graveyard. We also have one copy of Abyss Dweller as the only Xyz monster that we run. It's Abyss Dweller, y'all. It's not only going to give you graveyard negation, but it's also going to make all your stuff really beefy. Here's the Rare Fish and the All Vein that I mentioned earlier. So Rare Fish is pretty obvious, but the reason we're playing All Vein, because, you know, it's a Dark Fairy. Why are we playing this card? It's a level 2 tuner that can, combined with like any of your level 4s, give you instant access to Arion Posts. So yeah, while it does turn off Fishborg Launcher, it's still a really strong card to have access to, especially if you open both of these, because this is just a guaranteed Arion Post right here. And then finally, the only Link monster we play in the deck is Abyss Keeper. So the reason that this is in here is because I wanted a way to access Coelacanth from hand even more frequently, and the deck I was following was playing Big Wave, Small Wave, which I'll get into. Actually, let me go Big Wave. That's the thing I think I was missing. Sorry, I lost all of my EDO files in a really bad driver mishap, so I'll put this down here. But basically, it gets you a free special summon on Link summon of a fish from your hand to the zone this card points to, and you can also target another fish you control and a card the opponent controls and banish those cards. Keep in mind that's exactly like Ascan as well, so you don't actually have to keep your monster on field if you don't want to. But mainly, y'all, this is just going to special Coelacanth from hand, and while your end board's not going to be as strong because you can't get rid of the Abyss Keeper unless you banish it off of a random effect, it's still going to be a really strong end board because you're summoning 4 off of Coelacanth. So as always, on to some options that we could play but don't, or that once we played but no longer do. Starting off with Eonok, Sentry of the Ghoti. So this one is Ocean Sentry of the Ghoti. I don't remember if I mentioned this when I was talking about the anagrams. This one is Ocean, it's pretty obvious. But this is a level 6 non-tuner, similar to Snopios, but the main difference is that it doesn't have a special summon condition. It simply says if this card is normal or special summon, you can target one of your banished level 4 or lower fish monsters, special in defense position, but negate its effects, and you can banish a fish from your hand or face-up field to add a Ghoti trap from your deck to your hand. So I can kinda understand the theory behind this card. You summon back one of your banished things and then rebanish it so it still summons itself later, but the main issue is that without its own special summon condition, you have to hard rely on either Abyss Keeper, if you're even playing it, or Paces. Like, I'm pretty sure they want you to summon it off of Paces, but like, at that point, why? Like, why would I use Paces to summon something that can search one of the mediocre trap cards instead of just summoning a Coelacanth or like an even better monster from my hand? Like, Eonox, like, okay, but it'd be a lot better if it had a third effect that was a summon condition similar to Snopios. So I've been talking, like, throughout this video about the mediocre trap cards. Well, let's get into all 3 of them. Starting off with Ghoti Chain, this was their first one. It is a normal trap that says banish a face-up fish you control, special one of your Ghoti monsters that is banished or in your hand, deck, or graveyard with a different name, and so basically that means summon from anywhere. From that monster, banish to activate the card, but banish it when it leaves the field, and you can only activate 1 Ghoti Chain per turn. If this card were a normal spell instead of a normal trap, this card would be really, really good, but Konami just has a fear of giving archetypes that are already bad a really bad version of E-Telly. Like, considering you already have to banish something that might not even be a tuner that summons itself back just so you can access a Ghoti from anywhere, I mean, like, it seems strong, but on a trap card, it's like, and even on a normal spell, it'd be good, but it wouldn't break the deck in half. Next up is Ghoti Cosmos. So this is also a normal trap that says apply these effects in sequence based on the number of banished fish monsters. So for 1 or more, your fish monsters cannot be destroyed by battle this turn. 4 or more, the activation and effects of fish monsters effects activated on your field cannot be negated this turn. And 8 or more, special summon a fish synchro monster from your extra deck, and this is treated as a synchro summon. So I just have one question. Why? Like, what archetype, much less Ghoti, would ask for a card like this? So keep in mind, because you're summoning your stuff back and you kind of want to continuously do that and not keep your things banished, more often than not, you're only going to get the first effect, in which I mean, like, ooh, battle protection, like, who cares? Like, the 4 or more I can see being pulled off, but, like, God forbid you try to do the 8 or more. Like, you're gonna have to banish 8 off of just your distant deepest depths just to access this effect, and at that point you're probably already losing. And finally, they have Ghoti Fury. This is a continuous trap that says you can target a fish monster you control and a monster your opponent controls, banish both monsters until your next standby phase, and if a fish monster is special summoned to your field while any card is banished, you can banish this card from your graveyard or face-up spell and trap zone. All fish monsters you currently control gain 100 attack for each currently banished card until the end of this turn. So this one, compared to the other 2, actually isn't a bad disruption. The main issue is that your opponent gets their monster back as well. If it just gave you yours back, then it'd be a lot better, but even then, the main problem with Fury isn't that it's bad, it's that the Searcher is bad, because Distant Deepest Depths can only add Ghoti monsters, and that is the only way Eonox, is the only way to search for any of the traps. And if Eonox bad, then the traps are going to be bad, because it's not something you really want to play 3 of, especially in a combo-focused build of the deck. The final Ghoti card we don't play is their other level 8 boss monster, Guaglim, Spear of the Ghoti. Again, this is level 8. It is a fish synchro with 2700 attack and 0 defense. It requires a fish tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. And at the start of the damage step, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can banish that opponent's monster. And during your opponent's standby phase, you can banish this card. Then, if the monsters used as material for this card's synchro summon are all in your graveyard, you can special summon all of them, but banish them when they leave the field, and you can only use each effect of Guaglim once per turn. So what I'm hearing is that they took basically the most kick-ass artwork in the entire archetype and they slapped it on a terrible boss monster. So the first effect already is just completely out of place because you don't get as much benefit from your opponent's stuff being banished unless you're using it as a disruption. Like, ooh, you can get 2 monsters off the board by banishing one and punching over the other, but And then on top of that, it says you can summon back all the materials by desynchroing this card, but your stuff's not gonna be in the graveyard at that point. Like, genuinely, especially considering this is a level 8, why at any point, even going second, would I choose to make this card over just a white Aura Whale? Because white Aura Whale, being able to attack twice, do piercing, nuke all the opponent's stuff, and summon itself back if it gets destroyed, I mean, like, there's literally no purpose in going into Guaglim, genuinely. Sucks too, because they wasted a secret rare spot on him. So on to some of the non-Ghoti cards that either I have played or have considered playing. I really want to play Fishborg Planter. It says once while this card's in the graveyard, you can send the top card of your deck to the grave, and then if it's a water, you can special summon this card, and you can only use this effect once per turn. The only thing keeping me from playing this card isn't the RNG, but rather the fact that it's a non-tuner. If this were a tuner, because we're only playing, like, what is it, like 10 spells in the deck, like 10 non-monsters, this card would be absolutely insane if it were a tuner, because you could go Leaf Fish effect, send Planter, pitch the top card, special it, go into Arion Post, and then start comboing off from there. But instead you have to do the much slower Dump Shift combo and play on the opponent's turn. So I really wish Planter was a tuner, but I mean, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. So one of the more interesting cards that we don't play is Abyss Shark. So Abyss Shark is a level 5 water that says if this card is used for the Xyz summon of a number monster, it can be treated as level 3 or 4. If all monsters you control are water, minimum 1, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, add a level 3, 4, or 5 fish from your deck to your hand, but for the rest of the turn you're locked into water, and there's another effect that's literally never going to matter in any situation that isn't in a Shark deck. So when I was looking at Ghoti builds, I was like, why am I not seeing Abyss Shark in this build? But it dawned on me that Abyss Shark just doesn't really do anything. Like, it's a level 5, which is a terrible level for all of your synchro plays except for specifically Monoceros. It doesn't even add your level 2 tuner for you. It only adds a level 3, which you don't play, level 5, which you don't play other than Abyss Shark, or level 4, which none of them are tuners in your deck. And on top of that, it locks you into water, which is the big turnoff for this card, because things like Baron or Alvain are just way too important to have access to, especially Baron, to warrant playing the Abyss Shark over just using the things like Silent Angler. Moray of Avarice is a pretty funny card overall, but if it banished from hand, maybe, but considering it banishes from field, I don't think it's very necessary because you'd rather keep that board presence instead of drawing more cards in a deck that already can't extend too well. Now on to the really interesting one. So earlier I mentioned Big Wave, Small Wave, which is an ancient card. Like, when I saw this card in that guy's list, I was like, oh my god, I have not seen this since I was like 8 years old, 7 years old, Jesus Christ. But it's a spell that says destroy all face-up water monsters you control, then you can special summon water monsters from your hand up to the number of monsters destroyed by this effect. So I can only assume that the reason this card was in that guy's deck was so you can summon Coelacanth directly from the hand, but that was mainly because he wasn't playing Abyss Keeper, to my knowledge. Like, he was playing a second Deep Beyond. Like, our extra decks are the same except for the second Deep Beyond, because I don't know if that was for Castra or just because he wanted the second one, but I mean, just playing Abyss Keeper makes it to where you don't have to hard draw it. So I mean, like, why would I risk not drawing this card and then breaking on the Coelacanth when I can just play Abyss Keeper, you know? White Mirror is literally a monster reborn for 4 or lower fish that also adds one with the same name. This card isn't bad, there's just not really room for it, and it's not really necessary if we're just playing Monster Reborn. Now, Crossout Designator is a really funny one. This is a card that I'm definitely going to play in the side if I do build this IRL like I've been planning to, and it's because not only can you hit things like Nib or any of your side deck hand traps, but it can also be used as a combo piece, because what you can do is you can banish something like Pasties or Shift from your deck during your turn, and then during your opponent's turn it's no longer negated, so you could just summon it back for free, basically making it a quick effect gold star. Psychic End Punisher is a card that honestly, every day I'm getting more and more tempted to put in, I just gotta find the room for it. Being a massive towers that can also banish things, which, you know, your deck likes doing, and just helping you punch for games so easily, especially when you combine, say, for example, Ghoti of the Deep Beyond and Fishborg Launcher, or any of your other level 10s and level 1s, your Arcathes and your level 2s, even your level 8s with your Greethes. Like, any way to access the Psychic End Punisher is actually really easy, and it's just really something that I think I could definitely see myself playing in the near future. And then on to some more miscellaneous things, we have a number 4 Stealth Kraken. Kraken's a really good card, we just don't have room for it in the extra deck. And then the same goes for Bahamut Shark, which, I mean, if we already couldn't fit 1 slot in the extra deck, how are we going to fit 2 between the Bahamut and the Toad? Not to mention the Bahamut, after it summons the Toad, isn't going to be doing very much, as opposed to a deck like, for example, like Mermail or Marincess, that can then link it off into one of their link plays, so they can just get the Bahamut Shark off the board after using the effect. But here, it would literally just be sitting there and taking up space like a big idiot. Whew, that is going to do it for the deck profile. I do not know if it was just that long, or if it was just because of how many times I had to stop because my dogs were being a nuisance off camera. So here is where we would go into the replays, but before we get into the replays, I do want to announce something that's really, really big for the future of Sleeper Sunday, that being my Patreon. The long and short of it is that for $1 a month, you can have your name displayed on a splash screen that I'll include in every single video, but for $5, you can get some really awesome perks such as complete access to all of my PNGs that I use for my thumbnails, for your own personal thumbnail, project, etc. use. You can even potentially get early access to videos, such as Sleeper Sunday, because those are usually the ones that I post out the earliest, and of course you get your name displayed on the splash screen as well, but most importantly, you get to help decide what decks I build for Sleeper Sunday. Now that I've lost so many of my decks on EDO Pro and I just barely have anything left to even pick from for my polls anymore, this is more important than ever. So if you want to have the most impact on Sleeper Sunday as a series for what I believe to be an affordable price at least, and you also just want to support me and the channel directly, then be sure to consider checking that out. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into these replays. Alright, well I hope you enjoyed those replays. If you do want to see like the full live game and like all the play-by-play commentary stuff like that, then I do have the stream where I actually got all of these games recorded. I have that up, I believe, should be a couple of days ago as of this video going up. But with those out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into the strengths and weaknesses. So starting off with the strengths, Deep Beyond is one of the most impactful disruptions in the entire game. You're not only wiping the opponent's entire field, but you're also doing it on their turn, while summoning back the Deep Beyond and potentially any other tuners on the next turn, while he'll proceed to be an absolutely massive beatstick due to all the now banished resources from both sides. This basically serves not just as a disruption and a nuke, but also a great way to insulate your plays on the crackback, as you also have to rebuild your board, albeit not too difficult most of the time. And Coelacanth is also an insanely busted card, being able to make quite the large end board off of just itself and a single discard, usually still keeping 5 cards in your hand when the combo's all said and done. It can also give you a huge variety in your plays, since you can summon literally a different fish every single time that you use the effect, meaning it'll be hard for your opponent to predict what you might end on. It is even better when combined with the fact that there's like no locks in sight in the entire deck, giving you even more options still. As a deck like Tier Limit has suggested, playing on the opponent's turn is absolutely massive. This is because you're not only gathering resources on your turn and your opponent's turn, but you're also forcing your opponent to play around a combination of interaction as well as board building, making it significantly harder for your opponent to stop you or protect themselves. Due to the simplicity of the deck, simply opening just a lifeless Leaf Fish can bare minimum access you a free banish or even an entire monster wipe depending on the deck, so even in the situations where it seems like you bricked, you're not completely out of the game just yet. Finally, Fish, similar to a bunch of other types in the game that will eventually receive support later on, is full of broken cards, such as Coelacanth for example, and the deck will only get stronger the more generic fish support we get, especially if it's for its own archetype. You know, usually here's where I say for every strength there's at least one weakness, but there's only 3 weaknesses here. This is literally the strongest deck that I've ever covered on Sleeper Sunday. So to start the weaknesses, they're unfortunately unable to smell. Specifically, what the rock is cooking when your opponent reveals the Nibiru in their hand and just completely wipes everything you've built up. Granted, there are certain hands in which you can go straight through Nib, but a lot of the time, due to the overall consistency, it's going to completely end your turn in the tracks, leaving you praying that they're unable to kill you until you can play again. Even if you do get to play, you literally summon so frequently on the opponent's turn, they can nib you there as well, which is even more frustrating. Speaking of consistency, this deck can absolutely struggle in that department. There are some simpler lines, such as the Leaf Fish Dump Shift line, but sometimes you get the hands with like absolutely no synergy with each other whatsoever, rendering you completely unable to play the game. On top of this, even when they do get a great hand, extension in the deck can be iffy due to a lack of tuners that can even special summon themselves on your turn. So at the maximum, you'll get an Abyss Dweller after getting hit by a disruption or two. Like when you go off really hard, but your opponent shows you a single Ash Blossom and you get sunk like a scuttled ship. Finally, despite being a banished deck, you can't take advantage of really strong cards such as Macro or Dimension Shifter like other banished decks can, since you still need to access your graveyard to utilize cards such as Arion Post's Search. So how are we going to make Ghoti better? Well, to start, I think that they deserve another tuner. And yes, I know that means they'll get a 4th tuner in Archetype, but you have more than enough non-tuners, especially outside of the archetype, plus Deep Beyond can use multiple anyway. Specifically, they need a tuner that can hit the board on your turn. Maybe something similar to Zep in that if it's banished you can summon it, but I think more interestingly, a mini Snopios that can banish like 1 to hit the board would be really good for the deck. Also, it wouldn't have to be, but making it level 4 could make it pretty interesting, especially with all the level 4 non-tuners that you play, including the in-archetype Ixheap, so you can access your level 8 synchro plays better. Also, while they don't necessarily have any restrictions or locks on your turn, the fish only lock is a bit unfortunate off of the effects of your tuners, and I'm aware it'd be pretty broken if you could make like a Baron on the opponent's turn with it, so I think instead of obviously just changing the cards, we should offer more fish synchros in the pool, or should I say in the ocean. Like there's a total of 9, which isn't bad, but 3 of them are basically unplayably bad, so I just think it'd be nice to have at least one more option, particularly level 10 or even 12, with just some sort of neat disruption effect. Finally, I think with such a fixation on the traps, they deserve one that's actually good. Like, even if it would only be a 1-of in order to preserve the combo potential of the deck, a solid trap that you can reset off of Ixheap would be pretty cool. Maybe like a pseudo Infernity Barrier, or even an archetypal Imperm would be really nice. Anything that can serve as a good disruption without interrupting the flow of your combos, without damaging your own resources as well, would feel much smoother than the garbage we got in the first 2 waves. Get it? Waves? No? Okay, I'll stop. But with that being said, I don't think there's anything else I can say about Ghoti, so this is a really fun deck. I've had so much fun testing it and like building it on stream and off stream, and it's a deck that I'm even considering playing in real life because it's just so much fun, and it's literally the best deck that I've ever covered on the entire series. Like, funnily enough, it has some of the more like consistency issues than some of the other decks, like for example Suship, but like it literally goes maybe Ghoti because of the explosive potential, Suship because it's just really consistent at what it does and it can break boards, and then like everything else. I think it's a really cool deck with like some serious potential compared to a lot of the other stuff we've covered, and literally just 1 or 2 cards could potentially push this deck over the edge at becoming a top tier contender. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as also put this video and the channel into your recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like the rest of my Sleeper Sunday series, then perhaps consider subscribing because I want to hit 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. Not to mention it supports the channel more than anything else and it's absolutely free. Also remember that every month I do post a community poll tab in order to see what the community wants to see every month for the next Sleeper Sunday, but keep in mind that the poll will be manipulated by my patrons, so be sure to vote in the poll if you can, and also if you want to, then go ahead and join the $5 tier on Patreon if you want to suggest what decks will go in the poll. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.